Wow, what a weekend we've had with two storms. One on Friday with all that rain that we got, and then a snowstorm that hit during the night. And then on Saturday, another storm with snow squalls where you couldn't see for several hours what was in front of you. I was thinking of two stories in the gospel where the disciples find themselves caught in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. The first one takes place in Mark 4, verses 35 to 41. It's evening and they are crossing the Sea of Galilee to go to the other side. But they get caught up in the storm. Jesus is sleeping and the boat is filling up with water. And so the disciples wake Jesus up and they say to him in verse 38, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Don't you care? Wow, what are they saying about Jesus and his character? Of course he cared. But it is interesting how we often, when we're faced with a difficult time, question God and his character. Jesus gets up and in verse 39 says, he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Jesus asked them, "Do you still have no faith?" The disciples had spent time with him. They had seen him perform miracles, yet they didn't know him. They didn't know who he really was because they looked at each other and said, "Who is this man?" The reality of the situation is this: if you do not know who Jesus is, you cannot put your faith or trust in him, especially when you are in the midst of a storm. Looks like the faith of the disciples wasn't very strong. But then we find the disciples in another storm, but this time Jesus isn't with them. They had been out on the sea for over 8-9 hours. It was about 2-3 in the morning, and they were tired of rowing and emptying out the water that had been filling up in the boat. And they got the fright of their lives when they thought they saw a ghost coming towards them. But it was Jesus coming to their rescue. And he calls out to them in Matthew 14, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." Then impulsive Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking on water too. But he became afraid while he was watching the waves beating around his feet and feeling the gusts of wind about him. And Jesus rescues him from sinking. Verse 32 says, "And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, 'Truly, you are the Son of God.'" This time, the reaction of the disciples is different. They did not wonder who Jesus was, but instead they worshipped him. Why did they do this? Because they now understood that he was the Son of God. They had witnessed the miracles. They had spent time with him. He had poured truth into their lives. They knew him. When we know Christ, when we know God, our storms will not create questions as to who God is, but instead it will cause us to worship him for who he is, no matter what our circumstance is. So I ask you today, what is your reaction when you are facing a storm? Do you question the character of God, or do you worship him? The difference is in the knowing, and that happens by spending time with him and his word. So I leave you with this thought. When you know who Jesus is, then you know what he can do, and no storm, no difficulty can stand up to the power of God.